G'day, everybody. Wes down here from the Down Under Centre, and I'm joined by Breeze Sutherland from the Down Under Centre as well. So, Breeze, firstly, this is the first time you've actually come down to the Down Under Centre down in London. So you're based in Scotland, and you lived in Australia for how long?
It was about 10 years. I think I moved out when I was about 21, just when I finished uni. And then I stayed for 10 years. So yes, a big chunk of my life.
Now we know how old you are too, Breeze. Thanks for sharing.
I've been back a couple of years as well, so I'm not as young as I look.
Okay, there you go. There you go. So, Breeze, I think the purpose of what we're trying to do is get a bit of an insight on the sponsored visa pathway. So lots of people have this idea. You get offered a sponsored job, or maybe they've got a mate who's based out in Australia who said, oh, look, I can sponsor you. It's really not as easy as that.
No.
But let's get to know Breeze a little bit more.
Okay.
And I'm going to maybe not just ask you a few cheeky questions,
Okay.
obviously, and all that. So you were down in, so you were 21, you moved to Australia. Where in Australia were you mainly living?
I was in Sydney, so eastern suburbs girl, just like most expats that end up in Sydney, they always end up in the eastern suburbs. And
difference between Sydney, Australia, and you Glasgow, Scotland?
I'm Glasgow, Scotland now, yes.
Big difference?
No, not at all.
No? No? Wonder if they could understand you when you first got there?
No, not so much. Like, my accent has totally toned down over the years, so although you find it really thick,
yeah,
I think that you would never have been able to understand me when I first moved out there.
Yeah, I think when I first spoke to you, I was like delighted to have another registered agent on board, especially with your, with your experience, with sponsored visa for sponsored visas. But yeah, I remember like getting off the phone to my wife, I'm like, wow, she's such a strong Scottish accent. And then just to think that you spent so long, in Australia. I mean, myself personally, since 2008, I've lived in sunny London. And I think I've still got a bit of an Aussie accent when I speak to people. I haven't sort of got that UK twang.
No.
So we've managed to keep to our original accents, which is good.
A lot of English people that go out, they pick up the Australian because they're quite similar in twangs. I've noticed. So a lot of English people that I was friends with, they over time started to get a Sydney twang, which is quite.
My wife's
weird.
A bit the same now. Sometimes people will be like, "Oh, is she from Australia as well?" It's like, no,
you pick it up. It's English. I think it's English. There's something similar about their tones. They pick each other's up.
Perfect. Okay, so you were in Sydney. You were there for quite a few years.
Yes.
How did you become a registered migration agent? What made you decide that that's the career path you wanted to take?
So I was working in recruitment when I first went over, which was not what I planned at all. But I just finished uni, and I just fell into it. And
what were you recruiting? Was it general recruitment?
It was IT recruitment.
That's it.
So from that, in all honesty, I didn't really enjoy it that much. So I was lucky enough that a kind of admin type operational role came up in the business I was working. The second business I was working for, they'd sponsored me. So I was actually sponsored in a 457, which is now the 482.
Yep.
So I was on that visa and my company sponsored me. And then I moved into an operational role, and then I started taking care of all the visas for all the recruitment consultants. So that's how I first got into it.
Okay. Studying to be a registered migration agent, you did that in Australia?
I did that in Australia. So I approached my company and said, I really enjoyed it. I loved the visa side of the business. So I approached my company and said, do you want to put me through this course? And then I can do it not only for the company, but I can do it externally as well. So that's how I fell into it.
And how long was your course?
The course was a year. People can do it. It's completely different now. I think it's a lot hard. It was hard at the time, but I think they made it even harder just to kind of clamp down.
Okay, excellent. So you got into this business with a passion. You've actually been there, and this is information for me as well, which is kind of cool. So you were sponsored, then you sort of liked that, and then got into that sponsoring side of it. So how many years now have you been helping migrants and employers with the sponsorship, and not just sponsorship, but also all visa aspects? But for the purpose of this video, sponsoring side.
2013. So I think I did the recruitment for 2 years, and then I moved into the visas. So although I qualified as a migration agent in 2015 or 16, I was doing it for the few years before that, just internally for the business. But to do it externally, I had to qualify.
Perfect. Okay, look, let's crack on to it, because obviously visas change all the time, and you know, this is recorded on the 25th of the 6th, 2021. So we've had an amazing year with visas through the pandemic, where we've got, you know, our employment side of the Down Under Centre. We've got, you know, 200-300 employers. Just, you know, every day we're picking up more employers, and you're chatting with them, or I'm speaking with them about regarding their needs. You're speaking to them regarding their visa requirements. We know that Australia are screaming out for skilled workers. We've seen the states haven't been open for offshore applicants. We expect them, we've heard South Australia will open on the 16th of July. You inform the team about that. And with that, we still don't know what occupations they are as yet. So it's been a crazy year for migration. But saying that now, I think we just need to focus on how things are looking, get your perspective on it. And so we'll do that. We'll just crack straight into it. So you've got 2 sponsored visas. Okay, so one of the sponsored visa is an ENS and the other one is a TSS. Can you just shed some light on what that means?
Well, there's several visas within that, but I guess to break it down into 2, you would say your employer not, well, technically they're all employer nominated.
Yep.
But you've got your TSS, which is your temporary side. So
Yep.
the TSS is just temporary. So you're going out there to fill a temporary need. And then you're also, it technically falls under ENS, but then you've got your more, you've got your permanent side of it. So that's
Sure.
kind of the 2 different, you can, I guess the easy way of thinking it is your temporary and your permanent.
Okay, so if you were to, and when you're talking to employers, and I'm, you know, part of these meetings as well, it's quite interesting because from an employer's point of view, we sort of get the idea that they really want people on the TSS visa because they have more control over that rather than the ENS visa. So what would be the difference between arriving on a TSS visa and an ENS visa?
So employers are right in saying that they're going to want you to come out on the temporary 482 first.
Okay.
Because if they take you out in a 186, which is your permanent side, they have that fear that you're just going to leave straight away.
Yep.
So which technically you can.
And they can.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a period of time on the ENS visa when they have to be employed for, or then they lose their permanent residency?
No. So you basically, when you apply, you both do declare that that they'll offer you the role for 2 years, and 2 that you'll take it. So
Sure.
you are declaring that legally, that you will intentions to do that. But if your intentions change when you get there, they're not going to come chopping your door and taking your visa away from you.
Sure.
So you can leave.
Okay, so that sort of opposes, because I guess when you're doing this, you're working with the employer and you're also working with the applicant. Yeah, so I think it's hard because I guess, you know, you want to represent both in the correct way, and generally you want what's best for the migrant and the employer as well, because there is a cost to everything, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But obviously the ENS visa does favour the migrant. It's because of the permanent residency part of that process. And the TSS visa, how long are they for? Roughly.
So basically with your short-term TSS, which to me I call it the 482, which they're called both, but that can be anywhere between 1 and 4 years depending on how the company has to nominate you. So they're the one that decides how many years it will be for, whether it be 1, 2, 3, 4. But if it all depends on what occupation you've got. So the occupation list is kind of split mainly between short-term and medium-term occupation. So if you've got an occupation in the short-term list, you're only going to get 2 years max, and then you can apply for another 2 years after that. If you've got a medium-term, which is the trades, nurses, all that types of occupations, they can actually sponsor you for up to 4 years, but it costs them more.
Sure. So
it can anywhere between 1 and 4 years, depending on 1, the skilled list, and 2, the occupation.
Okay, so I'm let's say I'm a carpenter. My employer's offered me a job. I've said, and you know, with an ENS visa, obviously me as a migrant, you mentioned earlier that the requirement is they would have to complete a skills assessment on an ENS.
For the 186, the permanent 186 direct entry, which is the permanent visa off the bat, the skills assessment, but there's no skills assessment generally for the temporary 482s.
Perfect. Okay, so the migrant has a skills assessment. They apply for an ENS. They can arrive in Australia. They have an agreement for 2 years with the employer, and if something happens, their intention is to be there. But if something happens and they no longer continue to work with that person, then they still have their permanent visa.
Yes,
and then on a TSS visa, It could be anywhere from 1 to 4 years, depending on the occupation that they hold. And from that occupation, I guess, if you've been there for 4 years, what happens at the end of that 4 years?
So if you get a job and the employer says to you, right, we're going to sponsor you for 4 years, you go out and you be expected to work for that employer. So you're not tied to them because you can technically move, but you're expected to stay employed with that employer. So if you stay employed with that employer for 3 years, they can then nominate you for your permanent residency.
Do you need to have anything, Breege, to be able to move forward to a permanent, or they just nominate you?
For that, there's no skills assessment involved. It's based around the fact that you've stayed employed with them for 3 years.
Sure.
However, if you do have a skills assessment, they can actually nominate you anytime they wanted to, but this is only for those on the medium-term list.
Sure.
If you go out in a short-term occupation, which is on the short-term list, that can't happen. You're literally 2 years. If you're lucky enough, you're on the medium-term list, you go out, they could actually nominate you 6 months if it was going great for the 186, because there's 2 streams under the permanent. They've got the 186 direct entry and the 186 temporary transition. Temporary transition is after 3 years, they can nominate you.
Okay. Yeah, I think the beauty of us here at the Down Under Centre is we don't charge any money for consultations for the employer, as well as the as the migrant. So guys, don't just, I guess, read something and think, oh, that's the thing, I'm going to go to a TSS visa, it's going to work. It's work for my friend who's this occupation. It would depend on your occupation, depend on the employer and everything like that. So I guess a migrant's point of view, if you're lucky to get an ENS visa, maybe it's got its perks, but the employer, a little bit hesitant. They really do want people on the TSS. And on the TSS visa, after you've been there for 3 years, you then can nominate. But obviously there's circumstances around that, which is great. Okay, now look, at the moment, what are the timescales? Well, generally, pre-COVID to now, what were the timescales? So as an employer, we'll go from employer first. So I have made contact with the Down Under Centre as the employer. How long will it take for me to get approved by immigration to be an employer?
So it can be really quick. Like sometimes it's happening in a week at the moment.
Wow.
That's still happening that quick.
Okay.
But obviously, if someone's wanting to bring someone then from offshore, that's where it's becoming a long wait. But it's quite easy. If you use a migration agent, they know exactly what's required. We can get a company set up quite quickly and quite easily. Okay,
so it's reasonably easy for the employer to do that. Off the top of your head, what's a rough cost with immigration fees that employer would have to be set up to be able to sponsor?
It's not an awful lot. Like it's really like you're talking. The lodgement fee is only $420. Then you would pay also additionally on top of that, you would pay for if you use the migration agent. But technically speaking, it's not that expensive. It then becomes expensive when they start nominating people, and that's where all the cost is involved for the employer.
Okay. So if an employer wants to just have one person to be, what would they be looking at in government fees just for one person?
So if they wanted to nominate, it depends on their turnover. So this is when people approach me asking me for information just generally. It's really difficult for me to give it to the migrant because I'm like, well, what's the company turnover? What's this? It's conversations you need to have with the employer, which so basically it's split into 2 costs, over 10 million and under 10 million. So that's the first thing you need to find out. And if they wanted to nominate someone on a 4-year visa, if it was say a carpenter and they had a turnover of over 10 million a year, they're talking $7,000 odd just in skill training levy fees they need to give to the government to do that.
Wow. So it is, we get calls all the time. I've been offered a job. I'm halfway through my skilled visa process. I've been offered a job. How does it work? There's so much involved, and I think it's quite challenging to answer each one individually.
It is.
Because of all those things that just make it happen. Okay, so if a migrant, what would their cost be for immigration if they were on a TSS, for example?
So say you've got, the employer's got to cover all the nomination fees, and that's you shouldn't be expected to cover them.
Okay.
And then you've got your applicant fees. Again, it'll be split between short-term and medium-term occupations. There's just about to be a price rise on the 1st of July. So I think it's like about 2.5 to 3, I think it's going up to about $2,700 for an
It was
adult
actually today
applicant.
you posted that.
Yes.
Just today. There you go.
So
Very new.
it is. The whole thing, when it can really rack up a lot of costs. And what I've quoted you is not if they're using a migration agent as well. And obviously, we have then our fees on top of it as well. So it is for the migrant, it's probably a wee bit cheaper. A lot of the costs fall to the employer.
Okay. Now, okay. So is there specific requirements that the migrant has to have between an E&S and a TSS visa? Okay, so when it comes time for private health insurance or paying for schools or anything like that, how does that work? So if you're on a TSS visa, do you have certain costs that you have to cover?
So for a permanent visa, the 186, employer nominated 186, you go out there as a permanent resident. So technically, you don't have to worry about schooling and things. Well, there'll be costs involved if there is for that state, but it will be for permanent residents.
Sure.
So you'll be treated the same.
Yep.
If you go out in a 482, yes, you have to be careful that you choose the right state. You've researched the schools because they will slap on, extra fees for people on 482 visas. So it's something you need to look into.
Especially if you've got like 2-3 kids.
Yes, exactly.
And obviously there's medicals like healthcare as well.
Medicare for UK passport holders is usually available on both. So that's, for 482 TSS, you need to maintain health insurance, but a lot of the time employers, because they're the one that are technically responsible for you, a lot of the time will be happy for you to have Medicare.
Excellent. Okay, so we spoke about you can get permanent residency from the TSS visa, which is good. What happened so let's say I'm 43 years of age, I get sponsored on a 3-year visa, TSS visa. So by the time that finishes, I turn 46. Am I able to remain in Australia, or how would that affect me by turning over 45?
So that happens right now. Obviously, things change all the time. If you turn 45 and you weren't earning over 133,900 a year, so 150 grand a year, so a big salary.
Yep.
So most people are not going to be on a salary of that. That's an age exemption, so they could still nominate you. But if you were on a lower salary, they wouldn't be able to nominate you. So what you'd need to do in that situation, if you went out on a free year, you would need to say to them, you'd need to be eligible for a skills assessment, and you would need to say, I need you to nominate me now for the 186 direct entry before I'm 45. Okay,
so the main key is just to be onto it and do not turn 45 on a temporary visa. Make sure you've got all the things ready for the permanent. So if you're older and you're listening, guys, what we would generally suggest that they would go on a skilled visa, always. But as you said, it's horses for courses. It's what people's got. It depends on the financial side and everything like that. On a skilled visa, maybe someone may not be able to get through the English score to then be eligible to, they might be 44, can't get the English score, but they need to get them a skilled visa. So we've either, explained to the employer, look, it's best if he goes on an E&S visa. If the employer is really, sponsored and able to carry on and do TSS visas, once they're there, we get the skills assessment done in E&S. So again, it's a hard interview, this one, because it is case by case, isn't it?
It's very intricate, and it's difficult to even talk about it because, if someone listening, they might pick up things that maybe not, everyone is so unique in this. It's very different. It's everything's slightly different for different cases.
Okay, so we mentioned school fees and everything like that before. So if I'm the main applicant, I'm a carpenter being sponsored. My wife and kids obviously are allowed to enter Australia. They're on the same visa. I get it similar to the skilled visa. They become the partner and the children, the dependents on that. So there's no issues with that one.
And they get full work right. So if they went out on a 482, the main applicant is expected to stay with the employer. Bearing in mind they can move if they get nominated by someone else, but obviously the partner can work wherever they want because they're not going to be able to work in the same company as them.
Okay, so anything they want to do doesn't affect them.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Now, is there a minimum pay? So like if the employer's wants to be cheeky and say, okay, well, you're desperate to come out here, I'm going to pay you a tenth of what I would pay in Aussie. Surely there's regulations and rules. Yeah.
So basically they have to, $53,900, so $54,000 is the minimum that you can be sponsored, but they can't just put you on $54,000 if that's not the market salary rate for someone in the area. So you have to we need to provide documentation to say this person's been paid what you would pay in Australian So
Okay.
you need to prove that as part of the nomination process.
Okay. And I guess one of the, it's also finding an employer. So many people call us up. I reckon every day we're getting a client say, got a mate out there, he wants to sponsor me, or do you have anyone who can sponsor me? They've maybe looked at the cost of a skilled visa, skills assessments, thinking, oh, it's going to take a year from the day you maybe sign up to get the visa granted. Is it cheaper? How do we do it? But finding an employer is quite difficult. So obviously we've created the DUC Employment Hub, which is a tool that connects migrants to employers. And that's, extremely successful because employers can view candidates, all the details before they even look at, I guess, just talking to the migrant about those ideas. But is there, obviously you've got seek.com and you've got all these other pathways to do that. Now, your background with the IT recruitment, with our trades and nurses and everything like that as well, is there another avenue that you can think of where people can reach out to employers? Or I'll change it. So if I want to find an employer, so you've got to find the employer, what questions would I ask the employer to make this to prove that I'm keen for a sponsorship?
That's difficult. Like, I find with employer sponsorship, which is probably not answering your direct question, is a lot of maybe who you know and really networking and because if you just apply to a random job, a lot of the time they'll just see, oh, they've not got a visa.
Sure.
So it's very much really networking and putting yourself out there. And if you know people that have migrated, getting in touch with them. I do find a lot of the tradies that were putting through sponsorship, they've been out and working holidays previously and they've made these connections.
100%. They love it, don't they? They kind of, I think, well, the Aussies, we get along with the English and the Scottish. Come on. We get along with, and it's good. When we interviewed BGC the other day for Western Australia for all our tradies, he was had 40% of his workforce from the UK. And you just think, wow. And again, like with sponsoring and everything like that. But even them as a business, they were kind of more interested in our clients that are arriving in Australia with their skilled visas and their positive skills assessment rather than the sponsored visa. And we've all heard bad stories, like with everything, guys. Whatever industry you're in, you could be a plumber and you might have go to someone's house and see a terribly plumbed in boiler or something like that. Migration is exactly the same. We get employers that have sponsored people, spent all this money. The guy arrives over there, maybe from Scotland, for example, and maybe the job's in the Northern Territory. They're there for 3 weeks, realize how hot it is and the actual lifestyle change and doesn't like it. And the employer's going, well, hang on, I've spent this time, money, visa fees, immigration fees. It's, and I guess the time and the hope, and then also settling someone. And I think, through these podcasts and YouTube videos, I really want to keep, and I will harp on about this, it's about managing expectations, but also the emotional side of migration. And I think a few years ago, we had quite a few people go to a kitchen company. Okay. And it was based in Brisbane. They actually paid a relocation fee. They found someone at one of our events and they brought him over there. He absolutely loved it. Brought his wife across. They lodged the visas, had everything sorted. She lasted 2 weeks and said, no, it's not for us. So ever since then, that particular employer is really, no, we don't really want to go through that sponsoring pathway. So I think sponsoring is, okay, it's a good option. It has to be an individual chat. We don't charge any money for consultations, okay? We do get busy, so, be patient and everything like that. And I guess, if a client, if someone's got some questions, we can always send them an email, which they can send to their employer and ask a few questions to find that information out. Going back to that, is there 3 main points that an employer has to tick? You mentioned before it's earning. Do they have to have a company for a period of time?
Yes, they do. No, not necessarily. You've got 2 brackets, under 12 months and over 12 months.
Sure.
So if they're under, they need to prove definitely, like, show business plans and stuff to show they're going to be profitable.
Yeah, and they've got growth.
Yes, they've got growth potential. So no, it doesn't matter if it's even a new business. I'd say 6 months. You don't want to be trying it any less than that. But as long as they're doing well after 6 months and you prove that, then they potentially can become a sponsor. Excellent.
All right, so let's talk a bit about just to finalize it. 3 benefits of going on either a TSS or a sponsor visa that you think. You got 3 that you think are really, why, but that would be a selling point for people to go on a TSS.
Oh, it's difficult because obviously, there is that people want to go out and they want to have that freedom. But I guess the opportunity might come up
Yep.
a bit more if you've got a job and you've got a sponsor, you're not relying on states, points,
Correct.
waiting. Yes, you might need to wait for your visa, but if you've got that chance, it can seem a little more certain.
And would it be fair to say, Breach, that you've also got different clients. You've got onshore and offshore.
Mhm.
So if you're onshore, you're on a work and holiday visa, you're working with someone, you're over there, they're happy to sponsor you. They can just roll through the motions.
Yes.
We can time it so
Yeah,
easy, the transition. So obviously then it's a benefit to both, I guess, the employer, because they've had a, you know, that like they've had that young person working with them
Yes.
for a while. So that definitely helps. And offshore, it's a little bit harder to get that feel. And so many employers are like, oh, give us your work and holiday clients. Let's give them a try. If we like them, we'll then look to sponsor them. We would like to give them, you know, 3 to 6 months. And, you know, maybe with the changes that we're hearing through the working holiday pathway at the moment, upping the age limit, might help with that.
Yes.
So I guess, yeah, it is a tough question. It's a tough interview, this one, because it's so varied on onshore, offshore, the employer. What about this? What about work experience? So if someone's on a TSS visa, do they have to prove X amount of years?
Yes.
They do.
So it would be generally as if they've got qualifications, 2 years. If they've not got a qualification, this is one thing that is actually, that ties very well into what you just asked me about benefits. If you don't have a qualification and you can't meet a skills assessment, a lot of the time you'll meet the 482 because you can substitute your experience. So that's actually probably one of the biggest advantages, is that people are struggling with that area and they can't get through because of they don't have the qualifications. Is that if you've got 10 years experience, regardless, you should be able to meet the criteria.
It is so much trying to work out. It's so individual. I never realized this before this meeting. I've spoken, you know, many times on the phone and whatever, engaged with clients, but it's just really hitting me now how individual this whole process is, very much for the migrant, but also for the employer.
It's tying them in together because, you know, you're trying to always keep them both, you know, get the best interest, for keep caring of the best interest of both parties.
Yeah.
And you'll get you know, a migrant that phones up, and I speak to, you know, people a lot, and it's hard to have that conversation about tying in the employer. So it's always easier for me. I always suggest, you know, let's all be on a trail together.
Sure.
And then we can all see, everyone can see what's involved. Because
and honesty. Just if the employee's honest and the migrant's honest, and there's a connection there, it is going to work. And as you said, if they're not eligible for a skills assessment, and then they're eligible for a TSS. Now, let's say you get, we'll stick with the carpenter. So I'm a carpenter. I've been sponsored on a TSS visa. I didn't have the necessary requirements for a skills assessment, which is the NVQ level 3 and 3 years of paid work experience, or no NVQ level 3 and 5 years. So let's say I get sponsored, I've only got 4 years, weren't eligible for the skills assessment. I then spend a year in Australia. Now I'm eligible for the skills assessment. Is a migrant able to, while they're onshore in Australia on a TSS visa, complete a skills assessment and then apply for a skilled visa?
Yes, they are. There's nothing to stop them with the 482. As some other visas have restrictions and things, but
so that's a benefit.
That's a benefit. They could, but the thing that we always need to remind them is that then if they want to do a 190 and they move to Sydney, that they're relying on New South Wales then to nominate them, and that's an important thing to remember.
Of course. Okay, so if they were sponsored in Western Australia at the time, after they'd done their positive skills assessment, they wanted to put in an expression of interest if Western Australia wasn't sponsoring. Wow. Okay, so there's another scenario.
Yes.
Okay, so what we've learned is it's very individual. So a few of the negatives that I would say with a TSS visa is if you are eligible for a skilled visa, it's the best. Now, as a company, just to be clear, it doesn't affect us which way you go. It makes no difference. But I've always had this thing of like, by the time you pay, if you've got 3 kids or 2 kids, 1 kid, whatever, by the time you pay school fees, and you are out there working for an employer, I also find that people that generally work for themselves for a long period of time, you know, might be self-employed, run your own business, maybe getting into a company where then you're back, you know, relying on working for that employer, because if that employer was to, if you were to lose your job with that employer, then you would lose it would be correct in saying you'd lose your sponsorship visa?
No. So if your employer turned around and said, we don't want you anymore for whatever reason, and they terminate your employment, you'd have 60 days to find someone to lodge a new nomination to take over your visa.
Okay. And Breach, so if I work for a company, so let's say it was a 4-year TSS and I worked for a company for 2 years, I then left them, would I have to start the 4 years again? I would.
No, so say you were trying to do your 3-year temporary transition 186.
Yeah.
If 2 years into that, the employer says, look, we're shutting down, we'll need to let you go. You then have to go and start 3 years with somebody else. And then your visa might not even allow you to, you might have to then get another 482.
Sure. And you've got your age to consider where you're living.
That's why you should always, if you can, get the 186 direct entry. If you get out there in a 482 and you are eligible for a 186 for a skills assessment, start talking to them about the direct entry. Don't wait for the 3-year temporary transition, because what if something happens with that company? I would be saying to them, a lot, you can factor into appraisals and things like, if I do really well, will you nominate me?
Yeah.
It's some accommodation. If you go out in a 482 and you can meet the skills assessment, go for it. If you can't meet the skills assessment, that's never going to happen. Then you do know you've got the backup. But 3 years later, if you stay with that company, they can hopefully nominate you. Excellent.
Okay, Breach, let's wrap that up. Thank you, so much for being a part of the DUC team. You're absolutely amazing, and we're learning so much. I'm sure when this goes out, guys, if you want to get a hold of the Down Under Centre, we're based here in the UK, 0203 376 1555, but obviously in Australia as well. And or you can just info@downundercentre.com. Breach, thank you so much for this. Again, it's such a tough thing at the moment where everyone's trying to find the quickest, fastest way to get to Australia. And as we've learned, very individual. Give us a call and we can find out how that works. So, all right, guys, take care and good luck with your ventures to Oz. All right, catch you later.